What the mainstream media won't say about his ideology is that he was a white supremacist. He was an anti-Semite, actually an anti-Semite first. His anti-Semitism was the root of his white supremacy. He was an eco-fascist, a Nazi, a National Socialist. He was a communist and a racist socialist. He was also anti-American. He didn't want to identify as American. He wanted to identify as European. He bashed Fox News. He was not Christian. He stated they had no purpose. And he espoused the Great Replacement Theory. So what is the Great Replacement Theory? If you open up Twitter, you look at any mainstream media outlet right now, and they're trying to link this shooter to Tucker Carlson because of the Great Replacement Theory. So what the mainstream media is saying, how they are portraying the Great Replacement Theory is they're saying the Great Replacement Theory posits that mass immigration changes the demographic of a country, and in this case, the racial demographic of a country. That's actually not what the Great Replacement Theory is. The Great Replacement Theory is an Illuminati level, absolutely nutso, obviously anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that posits that the Jewish cabal, Jewish elites around the world are actively sponsoring or sending minorities, people of color, to the United States in order to change the racial demographics. So it's not just a matter of, oh, mass immigration is changing the demographics of our nation. No, it's much larger than that. The mainstream media is deliberately misrepresenting it in order to try to associate, well, people like Tucker Carlson with this shooter. So the actual Great Replacement Theory, do Democrats espouse this? No, they don't. Do Republicans espouse this? No, they don't. What Democrats do is accuse Republicans who are concerned about illegal immigration into our country and the impacts that illegal immigration has on our nation, on our nation's sovereignty, on our nation's culture. They accuse these conservatives of peddling the Great Replacement Theory. And that is a hideous lie. It's a lie that's intended to smear all conservatives. And it's also intended to invalidate a widely held political belief, a belief that's widely held on both sides of the aisle, actually, that our borders should be secured and that without borders, we cannot be a sovereign nation. All of that being said, the left plays with racial identity politics in a way that the right does not. And what I mean by this is the left tells us that, or the left tells us that people of certain races are only allowed to hold certain political viewpoints, meaning if you're Black, you must be a Democrat. If you're Hispanic, you must be a Democrat. You are not allowed to be a Black Republican or a Latino Republican. And so that is racial identity politics. That's saying that your race is your identity and that your race also entails that you hold certain viewpoints in your mind and in your heart, hold certain principles. I don't have to tell you that that's racist. It's very racist. But the logical conclusion of this racialized identity politics is that the left actually believes that changing the racial demographic in our country will change the political makeup of our country to leftist ideology because they believe that your race is your fundamental identity and that your race also informs your political ideology. So the left says that the right peddles Great Replacement Theory, but it's the left that's peddling this racist bunk, this nonsense, this poisonous idea. It's really racialized Marxism, but this poisonous idea that you're only allowed to have leftist political views if you have a certain skin color or if you have a certain ethnic heritage, and that's really a poisonous ideology in and of itself. Now, white supremacist anti-Semitism, as espoused by anybody, but in particular by this mass shooter, is a dangerous, poisonous, evil ideology. So is anti-white Black supremacy, like what happened in Waukesha, Wisconsin at the Christmas parade when it wasn't the car that drove itself and ran over all these people and killed this half dozen people at this Christmas parade. No, it was a Black supremacist terrorist who committed this act out of anti-white racism. So the difference, by the way, is when a killer who espouses a white supremacist ideology commits an act of violence in the name of that ideology, the left is very quick to report on the inspiration, the ideological underpinnings of that violence. And they actually should be. The difference is that when a black supremacist, an anti-white black supremacist commits an act of violence, suddenly this same mainstream media that was so interested in the white supremacist ideology of the white supremacist terrorist doesn't talk about the underpinning ideology of the black supremacist terrorist. You'll hear nothing from the mainstream media. It'll be a 2-day news cycle where that's downplayed. It's not reported. It's certainly not in the headlines. The left simply has nothing to say about it unless it's white supremacy. They have nothing to say about it if it is black supremacy. And it's very telling about the ideology of the left, because you should be able to sit here and say white supremacy is evil, it's poisonous. Black supremacy is evil and it's poisonous. And when either are weaponized into committing violence against people based on the color of that person's skin, it's literally from Satan. It's that kind of evil can only be from the devil, and it ought to be condemned, and we ought to understand at least what they're espousing so that we can stop it. We can nip it in the bud before it happens. That's what people on the right do. But people on the left and the mainstream media, which people on the left, the mainstream media, one and the same, they can't do it for both white supremacy and black supremacy. They can only do it for white supremacy because it's in their political interest to lump white supremacists unfairly and falsely with right wing, with Trump supporters, with the Republican Party, and it's evil.